Blexit is a term used by Candace Owens and other establishment conservatives to talk about whether or not the black populations of the United States will eventually trend Republican. Although this idea is often seen as a meme, as blacks in America have voted by 80 to 90 plus margins for the Democrats since the 1930s, there may be an underlying truth to it all. In the 2020 election, Donald Trump received 12% of the black vote to Joe Biden's 87%. Now, while Biden won this demographic by a landslide, Trump did improve from 2016 to 2020. In 2016, Trump only received around 8% of the black vote. And this is still a massive improvement from 2008, when John McCain only received 5% of the black vote. Now, granted, 2008 was the biggest landslide we will see in political history for some time, but only receiving 5% of the vote for a demographic that is increasingly growing in size is simply pathetic. Now, most political pundits and election predictors all agree that Blexit failed miserably, and I tend to agree with them. As I said earlier, 87% of blacks supported Joe Biden in 2020. That said, when you look at more in depth trends, urban areas trended solidly Republican. Some supporters of the Blexit movement said that proved black areas were trending Republican, and we should invest even heavier in gaining over support from black voters. However, to be frank, that is not the case. All the areas you see in the inner city that trended R plus 20 or R plus 40 are actually very high Hispanic areas. Let's look at some neighborhoods in New York City. Corona, Queens, trended anywhere between 22 to 29 points more Republican throughout pretty much the entire city. Yes, Corona still voted for Joe Biden by around 40 points, but it was still a massive shift from Hillary Clinton's winning Corona by 65 points in 2016. Hispanics in much of Queens and Brooklyn trended 20 to 30 points more Republican than black areas, where Blexit and organizations like it spent millions of dollars. The most well-known high concentration of African Americans in New York City is in Harlem. Blacks actually spent a lot of money in Harlem and other places in similar areas throughout the country to try to gain over support from the African American populations there. Let's compare neighborhoods like Harlem to large Hispanic areas and see if that money really helped us. As you see here, parts of Harlem definitely did trend Republican, but a decent amount of it, especially in the inner city part, in the center part of it, also trended Democrat. And yeah, you see a lot of lean to likely Republican areas, but when you actually look at them, they really only trended 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 points in some places. So basically, all that money, time, energy got us maybe a 1 to 2 point improvement in all of Harlem. Now, there's actually an area east of Harlem, kind of a suburb, I guess a suburb of it's really New York City, hard to describe it, but it's called East Harlem. And East Harlem took a massive shift to the right. And when you look at this, you must be saying, oh, well, Blexit must be happening, just not in actual Harlem. It's in East Harlem. And I hate to break it to you, but East Harlem is not even close to as black as actual Harlem. East Harlem is sometimes referred to as El Barrio because of its large Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Cuban populations. This part of New York, where we spent basically zero time and effort, trended heavy Republican in spots up to 16 points more red. African Americans have been voting Democratic for so long, and despite what you hear from Conservative Inc., Democrats aren't the real racist. And while blacks are struggling, it's for more reasons than voting Democrat over and over. Strategy-wise, it's actually better to target Hispanics over blacks. Hispanics are already trending heavy Republican, and we've not even tried to appeal to them. I'm going to look at the states that are becoming more competitive. Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, etc. These are all former Republican strongholds or swing states. Let's look at Texas. One of the largest Hispanic centers in Texas is El Paso. As you can see, much of El Paso trended Republican, especially the Hispanic parts in the southern and more close parts next to the Mexican border. Much of the areas that trended blue are more white and more suburban, and there was mostly just national environment, and the shifts were so small it wouldn't really matter that much. So looking at the rest of other parts of South Texas, it's also trended very Republican, and because, I mean, it's all blood red, and without these shifts, Texas would have only gone red by 3 points instead of 5.6 in 2020. The reason Florida is now looking like a future Republican stronghold is because of the Hispanic trends in the Miami-Dade area. Arizona and Nevada's Hispanic areas also trended heavily Republican. To me, it seems obvious we should start targeting Hispanics. Not only are they already trending, but they tend to be more working class and religious than most other minority groups. I did the math, and if Republicans manage to win the Hispanic vote in 2024 by just 1 point, this is what the electoral map would look like. That said, targeting Hispanics should not be our first priority. Before we even consider really making an effort to win over Hispanics, we need to try to gain more appeal among members of the white working class. They are truly the future of our party and our movement. With guaranteed room to grow in rural areas and the suburbs likely taking a shift back to the Republicans, if we can just get a little bit better margins with Hispanics, it will make the Republican Party unstoppable heading into future elections.